Welcome to the Recover You podcast with Kylene and Patrick. It's here that we talk about sex addiction, betrayal trauma, mental, emotional, and physical health, faith, and anything and everything needed to recover you to your most authentic self that God created you to be. Welcome back. I'm Kylene.
I'm Patrick.
And today we're going to talk about the next steps in the therapeutic recovery process. So we've already talked about discovery and what that looked like, and then we jumped into what a full therapeutic disclosure with a polygraph looked like, and that sort of process. This is like an extra piece to that process that is recommended, that we did, and that we highly, highly, highly recommend. It's a continuation of the same process that we've already been talking about, and that is the impact letter and the empathy letter. The impact letter is from the betrayed spouse. The empathy letter is from the betrayer to the betrayed spouse. And so let's just talk about, I want to talk about the process, our feelings, our thoughts, why we did it, how we did it, all that good stuff.
Mm-hmm. All right. So the first thing we're talking about is the impact letter. So would you describe what an impact letter is?
So the impact letter is literally what it sounds like. It's the betrayed partner writing a letter to the betrayer saying, this is how what you've done has impacted me. So for my letter, it had a lot of, just a variety of things. Like, how does it make you feel? Has it impacted your work? How has it impacted your brain? Does it impact your relationships, your ability to trust?
Right.
Any way that it has impacted your life. And in the beginning too, early on, it may be hard to even pinpoint that. Once you've kind of gone through it, you can really look back and make a long list. But your therapist can kind of help you work through that as well, kind of identifying that. But yeah, really, it's just, this is how you made me feel. And this is the impact that it has had on me in whatever way that is.
Did you use a specific format? Like, did your therapist give you a format or a guide sheet or anything like that to try to...
Now that you mention it, I was thinking, no, but I think she may have given me sort of a guideline to prompt those questions. Has it impacted your mental health? Has it impacted sleep? Has it impacted work? What emotions did it make you feel? Has it impacted your relationship, your ability to trust, those sorts of things? I do think she maybe handed me something to kind of prompt that. It wasn't like a fill in the blank or, here's exactly what you need to say or anything like that, because it needs to be in your own words and really sincere from you, because everybody's different. But I do think it was like prompting. Yeah.
So how did you feel while you were working on it? How long did it take you to write it? How did you feel while you were working on it?
So the way my brain works, this happens in business, and I think it just happens in my life in general, I have these bursts of creativity, and I will get a lot of things done, and then it'll be like dead. Right? And so I remember feeling, it was like the week that we were doing this, that we were having a pretty good week. We had just gotten through disclosure, so there weren't more discoveries, right, for several months.
And we felt good coming out of disclosure. It was like a positive. It was a real positive for us.
Right. And for months before leading up to that, there had been just discovery after discovery, and it was just havoc. There was no stability because of that. So it was just, so I felt like I knew everything. Things were going pretty well. And then it's like, okay, tap into your deepest, most painful emotions. So I remember that week thinking, well, I don't know if I can do this effectively. And then I can't remember exactly what it was, but there's a day I got mad. There's something. I did get triggered. Something happened. And I was like, this is my moment. This is my moment to write it all down. And so I did. I just got it all out in the moment while I was feeling the feeling. And I would encourage someone to do it that way, because what you want to encapsulate in the letter is the pain. So if you're sort of dissociated from it, because things are going well that particular day or that particular hour even, then the dissociation is not going to have the same emotional depth as you writing it when you're in the middle of the pain and describing what that feels like. And so I waited until, for whatever reason, I can't remember the detail, I waited until I was in the pain, and then it just all kind of came out. And I remember writing very descriptive phrases about how it felt and what was happening in my body and the level of betrayal and just the hurt that I had from it.
Yeah. How did you feel when you went in to read it? How did you feel reading it?
So I think from the very beginning, we had this sort of this undercurrent of being a team and kind of supporting each other through all of the steps. And even though we were going through this really horrific process, trying to support each other and kind of root for each other. So I don't remember a lot about how I felt at the time. I think if I remember, I just read it. And it was nice to get it out. But you and I know that you and I had talked about a lot of how it made me feel, and you were already very aware. So there was that too. But it was kind of the first time I think that I went to that depth and I described it in the way I described it. Because I remember saying, there's something very specific that I said around, the betrayal and how I had really trusted you implicitly. And it really felt like you had intentionally gone into my body and planted these little bombs. And then every discovery was like another bomb exploding in my body. And just trying to find the words to describe the pain, because really when I was going through it, it just felt like there weren't, and I still feel like that, there aren't really words sufficient and I think I said that in the letter too. As I began writing, I was like, there aren't sufficient words to describe what this feels like. But that's what I was trying to do. Now, I will say, I think therapists would probably call you on this. The goal of this letter is to share your pain. It's not to just completely bash the other person. It's like, it's one thing to say, what you did has really destroyed trust, and what you did has made me feel horrible, and what you did has ruined my self-confidence, and your actions have had this impact. And it's another thing to sit there and be like, fuck you. Right? So I was very much trying to just let you in on realizing that this was impactful on such a deep level and what that felt like to me.
Yeah. So, how did you feel when you were done? Do you remember feeling differently when you were done?
No, I remember when we did the disclosure, we kind of felt happy. I don't remember, and tell me if I'm wrong, I don't remember after these. I think we were kind of, it was almost like a letdown, right?
Yeah,
we're like, okay.
We were not. We thought we'd have the same kind of hit.
Hey, this is going to be another step. We're going to feel good about it.
Yeah.
And it wasn't as dramatic. So I think we just kind of did it, and then that was that.
Yeah. What do you think the benefits are of doing this letter?
Well, I think it's really, 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 really important to have a safe space to communicate your thoughts and feelings and the depth of the impact. Now, in our relationship, anything that's in my head comes out my mouth. So you always know how I feel. You always know what I'm thinking. You always know when I'm triggered. You always know why. We have a lot of communication about feelings and emotions. We always have, but I think it blew up a lot. I mean, it just went way deeper after this, obviously. But I think for some women that maybe don't always have that opportunity, or that's not the pattern or the habit that they have, or they don't feel as comfortable expressing their emotions, like this piece of it could be huge. This could be absolutely huge. It's their opportunity to really speak their mind and stand in their own voice and their power and say, this is what you've done to me.
Yeah.
I do think that that's a huge benefit. I think you probably already knew because I shared a lot of it with you ahead of time. But I do think the other benefit is just, stepping into the light, essentially, which we've talked about a lot, which is getting it out. I was getting it out of my body. Even though I've talked to you about it, I was sharing it verbally in front of you, in front of other people, telling you that this is the truth, this is what's happened. And also I think there's a benefit to being in that situation and being in that situation, listening and having to acknowledge it. So it's not like, I just off the cuff said something,
right,
and you're kind of thrown off. We were in a space where I communicated and you really had to sit there, feel it, accept it, and acknowledge the truth of it.
Yeah. What do you think you should avoid when you're doing it? I think you touched on it.
Yeah, I think attacking the other person.
Yeah,
I mean, I understand the temptation.
Right.
But I don't think that's helpful. And I don't think if you're in that space, it's like maybe this isn't the time to be doing this. Right. But that's, therapists can kind of guide you through that. They'll tell you, like, the goal of this is X, the goal of this is Y. Like the polygraph, I talk about this a lot on my social media and stuff. I'm like, don't do a polygraph if your goal is to go, gotcha. The goal of a polygraph is to build trust. If you're intending to stay in the relationship and you want to lay a foundation of I can believe you, then, do that. But it's the same thing with these letters. These letters, if you get to this point, it's not because you're imminently heading for divorce. It's because you're trying to build on communication and trust and empathy and make sure that you're on the same page moving forward, and that you understand the hurt that you caused me and that I understand that you understand.
Right.
And then that allows us to kind of go with that foundation moving forward. And I think that's the goal. So we want to make sure, and I guess in terms of what to avoid, or maybe switching that to like what to do, make sure you're doing all of these steps with the right motivation.
Yeah.
Because if you're not intending to stay with the person, then this step probably is not necessary. Although I don't know if a therapist would say that or not. Maybe I have to think about that for just a second. Maybe I take that back. Because would it be like, if we weren't going to stay together, do you think I should have still told you the impact?
It might be one of those things where you... I think to your point, I mean, it's important for the addict to hear that impact of it, because that's all part of breaking denial structures, right? And so So take back everything I just said. Yeah, well,
just kidding.
I feel like if it's important to get it off your chest, maybe you can do that in a therapeutic format, but maybe not.
But maybe it's not part of this process at that point, because it may not come after disclosure.
Yeah.
I don't know, but everybody's going to be a little unique. But I think the biggest thing is go into it. Your goal is to establish trust and avoid, as much as you want to, just attacking their personhood, who they are as an individual.
Right. Okay. Anything else you want to add about that letter?
No, I don't think, I think the big deal for us was the disclosure. I think that was the biggest thing for us. Yeah. So the impact letter, I find it very, very important. And it was actually really helpful for me to know that I had to write it. So then I was like, okay, today I'm really upset. I'm going to write, to be aware and take that opportunity to kind of get it all out.
Right.
And so that was really helpful. I actually do read it in my What's Next course.
Oh, do you?
Yeah. So when I'm... the What's Next course is designed for women that have just gone through discovery, and it teaches them all of the steps and what to look for and the step-by-step process going through the therapeutic disclosure. So if you're staying with your partner, like, what does that look like? What questions do you need to ask? What questions do you put on a polygraph? All these things. And so when I talk about the impact letter, I actually read my impact letter in that course.
Good. Yeah.
Just because there's a little bit of a format. So if you want to take that and listen to it, but then also so you can, so you can hear another woman describing how it feels.
Right.
And, sometimes I think that can be helpful so that you know if you're feeling these things that you're not alone. Yeah. Okay. Would you like to talk about the empathy letter?
I'd love to.
Okay, great. Okay, so the empathy letter is really your impact letter to me. But the way our therapist did it, which actually is a little unique, is that so the empathy letter is like the betrayed spouse demonstrating that they understand the impact, that it's soaked in, that you get it, that you can express back to me and communicate that, like, I understand that this is how you feel and this is the impact it had, right? So it's basically like saying, I get your impact letter, I understand it, I've acknowledged it, and I'm going to communicate that to you.
Yeah.
Ours, they recommended that you write it in my voice, which was a little unique. So you actually wrote it as if you were me.
Right. Yeah, so that was, there was the format that I used for the disclosure, the empathy letter and the restitution letter, because I think I read both of those on the same day. I remember there being two assignments there. So my therapist had given me a book, and I can't remember what that book was, but it was very kind of detailed on what I should include and how I should go about doing it. And I remember as I wrote all three of those documents, as a matter of fact. I remember referring back to it. Did I cover everything? Did I get everything? So it took me a little while to prepare these. It took me obviously a long while to prepare the disclosure, and then a little bit less time. I think I once again, it's the notion of attunement. I think I was connecting pretty quickly with how it made you feel. I don't think that was ever. I mean, I understood the impact. I don't think I understood it fully, but I wasn't in any sort of denial that you were like, okay, we've talked about it, we're done. Like I knew it really, really did hurt you. So it took a little while to put it together, but it was pretty interesting. And having to read you my empathy letter from your point of view after you read me your impact letter, I wasn't as good as you, and like I remember thinking that, like I didn't cover nearly the ground that you did. And I'm usually a little bit more of a brief writer, anyway. That's just kind of the way I write. But I just remember feeling after you read the impact letter, I knew you were deeply hurt. Hearing some of those words and the analogies that you threw out there, the feelings was very impactful, because it was like, oh my gosh, that's not at all. And you start to sit there and think, that's not, when we said our vows, that's not what I intended to do to you. You know what I mean? It really was not. And so it was kind of a tough thing to hear. So then I
remember thinking after you read your impact letter in my voice, I was like, oh yeah, you got it. So
that's nice of you to say that. Yeah.
So that's funny that you listened to mine and thought you didn't cover enough, because I remember thinking, it was shorter, but I remember thinking, okay, you understand. I did think that you did a really good job, that you communicated that you understood.
Yeah. So, I mean, how did I feel reading it? I wasn't as naturally terrified as I was like when I read the disclosure. But I felt like, I think at that moment, because it had been May, is that when we did it? Mm-hmm. And so that had been 4 months at that point, into recovery. I really trusted the process. And so at this point I was like, I have to do, this is all part of it. So let's giddy up and go. And so, it was, how did I feel reading? I think I had that in mind. But I think I was always curious that I was going to say something that might trigger you, or say something that you might be like, no, that's not at all how I feel. Like you because there's been a lot of tough conversations and you getting triggered and stuff like that. And so you're kind of used to that. It's a little bit of like, this is going to happen again. But you did not. You did not at all. I think you're always cute because you go, good job. And so I think you probably said something like that. So, but I think it was really important because, you all of us could, well, maybe not all of us, a lot of us can define empathy. But practicing empathy is a learned skill. And so I think this is...
Well, say that again. I think that's important.
All of us can define empathy, but practicing empathy is a learned skill.
What do you mean by that?
Well, we all go, yeah, I wish you'd be more empathetic, or we understand that it means understanding. But you got to remember what you were doing, or what I was doing in this addiction, was a lack of empathy. Extreme lack of empathy. Mm-hmm. And you don't really think about it that way.
It's not your intention.
No,
but that's the outcome.
Right. It's not your intention at all, but it really, if you truly had deep empathy, right?
Empathy really, right. It's because it's really experiencing and understanding the concept of like the emotions that the other person feels.
Feels or will feel.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you were in your addiction, let's say physically or emotionally aware and feeling the emotions that I would feel if I ever found out.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, you would confess, you would drive yourself right to therapy. You would, you know what I mean, like, and so I think developing empathy is a big part of the addict's recovery cycle. Is you have to develop that.
What do you think? Okay, well, let me ask, do you think I expressed empathy to you through the process? Oh,
absolutely. I think you had said this a couple of months ago. You were like, in a lot of ways, you felt sorry for me. And there was times I think you just felt sorry for me. I think that's what led you sometimes to come down like at 1 a.m. to get me. or whatever, and you know what I mean? I'd be like, I remember a couple times, like most of the time I was like, yeah, I get there. There were some times I was like, I'm really tired, can I just stay here? But it wasn't like that I didn't want to come up there. It was a really cozy bed, And so
At 1 o'clock in the morning.
It's 1 o'clock in the morning, yeah. So I think you always, I think you knew, I think very quickly you kind of figured out that this was never my intent to hurt you, even though I did. And I think I would hope that you had this sense that I was trying to do the right thing. Yeah,
I did. And I think I tried very hard to balance empathy with boundaries. I tried really hard because I was like, I had a lot of compassion for you through the process, and the person that I thought you were, that I was kind of waiting to see if that was true.
Yeah.
So I had a lot of compassion for that person while being incredibly angry and hurt and needing space and all these kinds of things. And so I was trying to balance that. But I also think, you were saying empathy is a learned skill to practice. I think in the addict brain, it is so self-focused and it's so ego-driven. But what's interesting to me was you jumped into empathy very quickly through the process. So do you think that's just part of who you are, like your character at the core? Or do you think that's because you jumped into like the emotional work so quickly?
I think I do possess some, compassion. I think I do possess those things. I think it was flawed. It wasn't complete. It wasn't, of course.
Well, let me maybe ask this.
In all those things.
Maybe I can ask it in a different way. Because I think we would agree you have that at your core, right? Like that's you would be very open and receptive to that without the addiction present. Like that's who you are, is able to emote and empathize and have compassion. So then maybe I'll ask it a different way. How much do you think in your addiction it impacted your ability to empathize?
It's hard. I wouldn't want to assign a percentage to it, but absolutely had an impact. Because I think lack of empathy leads to selfish behavior. So, when there is selfish behavior, it's usually because there's a lack of empathy, right? And so, some people may disagree with that conclusion, but I think, clearly there were, like I was talking about in the last podcast about judging people, that's a lack of empathy. And so I find I judge less now than I used to. So I was a little bit more judgmental than I, probably should have been,
I've really found that every painful experience I have in life makes me more empathetic to other people.
Yeah.
Because you're now able to feel what they're feeling or think about what they may feel.
Right.
How would you kind of within that, because I think a lot of people have compassion, right? But that's different than empathy. So how would you maybe define the difference between those? Do you think, sorry, I'm going to compound the question. Define that.
I need to write this down.
Define that and then say, do you think you had compassion through your addiction but not empathy?
It's a good question. So I guess compassion is maybe feeling sorry for somebody, saying, hey, that person doesn't, and maybe I can draw an example of this. Compassion would be coming down the off-ramp of a highway and seeing a homeless person there begging for money and saying, man, that sucks. It's cold out. That really sucks. And whatever. And, maybe giving money or not. Empathy might be like, wow, what happened in that person's life to get them to that point and feeling it deeply. And, does that mean that you take that person in and put them up in your house or whatever? I'm trying to cut that off before, but I think you can really feel the pain and the shame of that person as they stand there and beg for money. And, people will be like, oh, it's all a scam or whatever. But I don't know. I think when you look at people that are standing there.
You're really going down a political road here.
I am. I really am. And I think most people don't.
I'm kidding.
They're not little kids and they're like, hey, my life's goal is to stand on the corner of a thing. So there's some real deep pain and hurt that
what you're saying is and regardless of who it is that you're coming across, it's asking the question, what happened in your life in order to get here? I can do that with trolls on the internet. What pain has happened in your life? What experiences have you had that make you feel better about yourself putting somebody else down at 2 a.m. on the internet?
Yeah. And maybe it is a scam with the person, but they're scamming because they got hurt, and this is the way that they figured out how to do it. They're not going off to a healing center.
Right. And just to clarify what we're talking about, this empathy doesn't excuse behavior.
No, it never does.
Okay. So back to your addiction though, compassion versus empathy. What do you think was maybe more prominent during your addictive behavior?
Oh, compassion, I'm sure. I mean, and I wasn't devoid of empathy. Mm-hmm. I think that's where you're coming from, but I am certainly more empathetic now.
Well, I don't know, because let's pull out some specific experiences. Mm-hmm. This just popped in my head as that sentence was coming out of my mouth. So there is a movie that you wanted to watch. This was before Discovery.
You're talking about Blazing Saddles?
Yeah, that's it.
Mm-hmm.
And you were just talking it up and saying, hey, this is really funny. I really think we should watch this. I haven't seen it in decades or whatever. Yeah. And it's hilarious. We should watch it. So I don't know, 5-10 minutes into the movie, I say, this is really inappropriate. Why do you find this funny? Mm-hmm. I don't find this funny. I really don't appreciate you kind of pushing this on me. And in fact, it kind of concerns me because you were so adamant that it was so funny that I was like, would you have watched this with Keegan? Because I was like, this is really inappropriate humor. Mm-hmm. And in that moment, you were defensive. You got angry at me, which is really unlike you. This was very far into the addiction and very close to Discovery. So I think that impacted your reaction a lot. But you were very defensive, and you were like almost angry at me for not giving you a chance with your 80s movie that it was funny. And I was like, well, I'm sorry, but it's not appropriate. And I don't think that that's funny. And you did not express any empathy in that situation. And that was very heavy in your addiction.
Yeah, I remember that. I think all I was, I don't want to go into this and that. I mean, it was a movie from my childhood. I recall it being funny.
Right.
You know what I mean?
But I think my point is, no, I don't think you went into it with nefarious intentions. My point is, I think if that happened today, it would have been a different conversation.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with you. You know what I mean? I think it would be much more around like, hey, let's look it up. Let's see what's on there. You know what I mean?
Or even so I think too, you really wanted to defend it at the time. Mm-hmm. I think now, and tell me if I'm wrong, but I think now you'd be like, oh, I didn't remember that was in there.
Right, yeah.
I acknowledge that that's inappropriate. Mm-hmm. I think, at least where we're at right now in the conversations that we have, that those are the types of things that you would have said, as opposed to at the time, in the height of your addiction, you kind of got mad at me for thinking that it was inappropriate.
Yeah. I mean, it's always funny to grab one example. I'm trying to think back.
Yeah, it was a long time ago.
What was going through my head? But no, I would agree with you. I think I'd be like, oh, okay, hey, listen, if you don't like the movie, then we can certainly stop. And I think we've done that multiple times, or whatever. Like, hey, do you not want to watch this? We can pause it. We don't have to, do this or what. You know what I mean? There's any number of other options you can do when you're expressing empathy towards somebody than doubling down. I think that's kind of the heart of that example.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
what's the difference between the empathy letter and the restitution letter?
So the empathy letter was trying to demonstrate to you that I understood how you felt. The restitution letter was, hey, these are the things I'm going to try to do to make it right. Mm-hmm. These are the steps I'm going to take. And so, the good news is I'm a process-oriented guy, and I was already engaged in a lot of process. Mm-hmm. And so I was able to kind of incorporate a lot of that into it. And it's interesting because I'd actually like to pull that letter out and read it and see, how am I doing? You know what I mean? And just kind of say, hey, how's that going? Now, I have done some things like some 10-year letters and stuff like that I've written for the Conquer group, and I've read those recently. I'm like, hey, I'm actually doing what I said I was going to do. So I would imagine the restitution letter would follow the same piece. But it was just basically a commitment to you that says, hey, I recognize what I've done. This is what I'm going to do to make sure that number one, the behavior never happens again, but also beyond that, on the emotional support side, this is what I'm going to do.
You are essentially communicating how you're going to restore the relationship in addition to continuing your recovery process, right?
Right. Yeah.
Cool. Anything else about those two? Like, why I mean, on your side as the addict, did you feel like those were important, the empathy and the restitution
I
letter?
think so. Yeah, I think being able to put things down on paper is really important, and people don't. Unfortunately, with texting and stuff like that, people don't. Like that physical act of putting a pen in your hand, and of course we type these as well. But I know I hand wrote a lot of it and then typed it. But I think it's just a really important process to take thoughts from your head, put them down on paper, and then communicate those. And I think you never. What's the actual impact on my healing? It certainly had an impact on it.
Anything else?
No, I think that's it.
Cool.
All
right, good job.
Yeah, good job.
Thank you so much for listening. If you found this podcast interesting or helpful, it would mean so much if you leave a 5-star review or post a screenshot and share on social media. We are on a mission to share the message of recovery, and you can help get the word out. If you know a friend who could use this podcast, please share it.